Would you believe it? We're back again already. More ratings news in regards to NHL 24. It was just yesterday that we got the news about the top wingers in the game. And now today, it's a double hitter. The best body checkers in the game, as well as the top defensemen. And we're going to be talking all about that. If you did miss yesterday's video in terms of talking about the wingers, make sure to go check that out. It was a bit of a late upload, so you may have missed it, which is more than all right. But I want to start off here with talking about the top 10 body checkers in the game. And, you know, this is an interesting one because I still don't entirely know what they use to decide the top 10 body checkers. For example, someone like Jacob Trouba is absolutely known as one of the heaviest hitters in the game, maybe one of the dirtiest hitters, depending on who you ask. But in terms of how many checks he lands on average in a season, he shouldn't be number one or tied for number one with Luke Schenn. When I do the roster editing, I go on Hockey Reference, I look at the games played, the amount of hits, average that out to an 82 game kind of level. And Jacob Trouba is good. He is an above average hitter in terms of the amount of checks that he lands. But he's not number one, right? He's not. Luke Schenn, absolutely in that conversation as someone who should be up there. I think you can rightfully have Luke Schenn in that top 5. I wouldn't have him at 2. There are a couple of guys that are ahead of him at that stage, but he is in the top 5. I'd have him at 5. Ryan Reeves, absolutely top 4, no matter where you put him. He's right there. He is in a proper spot in the top 4. Milan Lucic is right in that Jacob Trouba level. I think that's a bit of a legacy rating at this stage. Again, unless you're talking about his technique behind the checking, then that's certainly debatable, but that's also very difficult to quantify. If you're looking at the amount of checks, Lucic is in that Trouba range of very good, but he's not at the elite level in terms of the amount of checks in a season. Radko Gudas, top 5, no doubt. He is right there in that mix with Ryan Reeves. And I will mention the other guys that should round out the top 4 because they're missing from this list. In terms of the heaviest hitters in the game, there are really 5 guys that stand above the rest. It's Luke Schenn, it's Radko Gudas, and then the 2 that are missing here, which I'm sorry, this is... It's just blatantly bad. Tanner Jeannot and Cal Clutterbuck are right up in that category with Schenn and with Reeves as 2 guys that not being in the top 5 is kind of not being in the top 10 is egregious. That is the only way to put it. Those 2 missing for the top 10 checkers is insane to me. Matt Martin, absolutely on that list. There are a lot of guys now that you could have outside of that top 5 in the conversation. Matt Martin belongs there. Braden McNabb absolutely does not. He's in a category below Trouba and Lucic in terms of the checking. Like, he is an average body checker in terms of the amount of hits landed. So that is absolutely egregious. Tom Wilson, 100% in that top 10 conversation. Ross Johnston in that Trouba Lucic range. I mean, again, people view him as an enforcer, but just because you have that reputation doesn't mean that the numbers actually correlate to, oh yeah, you're one of the best checkers in the game. Marcus Foligno as well is in that category. But in talking about the guys then that are missing, aside from the big names that I mentioned of Jeannot and Clutterbuck, there's a lot of guys that should be in consideration for this list that are not there. We're talking Jeremy Lauzon, Liam O'Brien, Yanni Hakanpää, Jack McBain. He's not signed with the team at the moment, but Josh Archibald, Brady Tkachuk, Parker Kelly, Garnet Hathaway, Nick Delorier, Will Lockwood, Michael Pezzetta, Paul Carter, Martin Fehérváry. I could keep going, but those are a lot of guys that deserve to be on this list in terms of how often they hit in a game over Trouba, over Lucic, over McNabb, over Ross Johnston. So this aspect, not very promising to me, unfortunately. And again, We're just going solely off the numbers. Quantifiable, here it is, plain black and white numbers. If they're going off of the technique of the checking, again, I'd love to know how they decide that and how they quantify that. If there's a stat tracker out there for who lands the hardest hits in the game, then hey, I'd love to see that. Feel free to send me that resource. But yeah, this is You know, we talked about the winger list yesterday, as we'll move over to the defensive side here. We talked about the winger list yesterday and how, for the most part, the right people were there. It was more a matter of who was missing or the order. But for the most part, you couldn't necessarily disagree with it. That checking rating, not so good. But as we get to the defensive side of things, they broke it up from left and right defensemen. We'll get started. The left-hand side, the top left defenseman in the game, Roman Josi, 100%. He is the best left defenseman in the National Hockey League. Hands down, I'm good with this. The 97 defensive awareness is probably a little bit high, but that's how they're going to get him to a 94 overall. I would just give him a better shot. But yeah, Roman Josi is the best left defenseman in the world right now. He is. Victor Hedman is a top 4 left defenseman in the NHL right now. I am not surprised that he maintains what, I gotta be honest, is a bit of an overrating at this stage. It's based off of his reputation, his legacy. He is still very, very good. Like I said, he's a top 4 left defenseman in the NHL right now. You can kind of argue based on lefty, righty if he's still top 5 in general. For me, it's a little bit high at this stage, but he's in that mix as arguable the second best left defenseman in the NHL. So I can't agree with or disagree with it too much. I do think it's a little bit high of a rating at this stage, but again, placement, it's not the worst thing in the world. Rasmus Dahlin is in that conversation as a top 5 left defenseman in the NHL right now. I can't disagree necessarily with the placement. I do think there are others that are in that very close conversation that could be above him at this stage. We're going to talk about one especially that's a bit egregious. But, you know, for the most part, I mean, is Rasmus Dahlin a top 5 defenseman? Yeah, he's definitely a top 10 left defenseman. So, again, placement's probably a little bit high, just a smidge, but it's not the most egregious thing in the world. Quinn Hughes. He's in that conversation as like, okay, is he the 5th? My mind, he should be in that 5th to 7th range. Again, though, it's not the most egregious thing in the world. I can't disagree with it too much. Miro Heiskanen, for my money, should be ahead of Dahlin and should be ahead of Quinn Hughes. Again, it's not the most egregious thing in the world. He's 1 overall point worse than Dahlin, the same overall as Quinn Hughes, but I do think there is a tad bit of disrespect going on towards Miro Heiskanen. I would have him in that top 4 at this stage, but again, he's 5th. It's not the end of the world. Shea Theodore at number 6. It's a little bit of an overrating. It's based off of, I would imagine, primarily playoff performance and the fact that the Vegas Golden Knights won the Stanley Cup. I think he is in the conversation to be top 10, but you could also leave him out into the early teens. Again, this is the first one where I'm like, all right, that might be a little bit high at this stage. And I like Shea Theodore a lot, I promise, but that one might be a little bit high. Josh Morrissey. Can't necessarily disagree with it. Might be a spot or two too high. Is he top 10? Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I mentioned it with Kyle Connor. I was very happy to see Josh Morrissey get that kind of proper look and the proper respect, especially when another great Jet like Nick Ehlers did not. So not too upset about that. Devon Taves. For my money, and a lot of people will say it's because of who he plays with, but right now, if you're basing him off of performance, he should be top 4. And again, a lot of people disagree with that and say he's getting carried by Cale Makar. But for my money, I would have it as Josi, Heiskanen, Hedman, Taves as the top 4. And then you can get into Dahlin, Quinn Hughes, and one other guy who still hasn't been mentioned yet, which I'm a little bit surprised, but we'll get to that. Jacob Slavin. Hurricanes fans will hate me for this. Not top 10. Not top 10. Top 20? Yes. Top 10, I have other people ahead of him. This is the one where I'm like, all right, That's kind of a bit of a stretch because Thomas Chabot, I would also say, is very much a top 10 defenseman in the NHL right now. I'd put him around 8 or 9 at this stage for the left-hand side. The biggest example of all right, that's a bit of an overrating at this stage is Jacob Slavin. And it's based off of the reputation that he's rightfully earned, but it's a little bit too high at this stage. Still a very, very good defenseman, not quite a top 10. We look at the back half. Mikhail Sergachev, I can't necessarily disagree with it. I think he's in that conversation to maybe sneak into the top 10 and to be in these early spots. That's fine enough. Adam Pelech, Islanders fans, I'm sorry, massively overrated at this stage. Once upon a time, absolutely deserving of this rating. I struggle to put him any higher than 15th at this stage. And honestly, I'd put him even lower than that off of recent performance. So, and by recent, I don't just mean the last season. So for Adam Pelech, it might piss some people off. That might be the most egregious one so far. Hampus Lindholm. Look, I've really come to enjoy Hampus Lindholm as a Boston Bruin. I was infamous in saying I didn't think the Bruins needed to trade for him at the time that they did. Obviously, since he's been great, they've locked him up long term. That's fine. Still, if you're looking at the end of his Ducks tenure and compared to what he's done as a Bruin so far, I would not have him in the top 13. I wouldn't. Is he top 20? Yes. Top 13. Again, I feel like there's some other names out there that deserve those spots a bit more. And then we get to the other one that I was talking about for top 7. Zach Werenski should be in that conversation with Quinn Hughes and Rasmus Dahlin in that kind of spot on the rankings. Zach Werenski being at 14th, I think, is immensely disrespectful. He is a top 10 left defenseman at the worst. So that's another one that I look at. I'm just I don't know how they're deciding these things. Vince Dunn, very much in that category of could be in that 10 spot or in the early part of the back half of this list. I'd say he's ranked a little bit low right now, given who else is up there. You swap him and Pelech, and then we're talking. But yeah, Vince Dunn had a great season in Seattle. He was really good in St. Louis, too, before he went to Seattle and broke out even further. In consideration for top 10. Matthias Ekholm, overrated at this stage. I like Ekholm. The end of his time in Nashville wasn't up to his normal standard. Started to figure it out in Edmonton, especially around playoff time. I do think he'll be better this year with a full season under his belt as an Oiler. Overrated at this stage. Not by much. I don't think he can be, out of that conversation for top 20. I wouldn't rate him higher than where he is. But like I said, I think really it's the mindset for me is that it's just more impacted by the fact that there are other players that probably should have been higher up there. It just kind of is what it is. Darnell Nurse, top 20 left defenseman. Yeah, I can't disagree with the rating too much. He's not top 10. He's not top 10 because of his defensive ability, and him having 90 defensive awareness is hilarious. But he does hit very hard and is a very good offensive defenseman. Makes a hell of a lot of money. Can't necessarily disagree with it. Again, it's not the most egregious thing in the world, but does he deserve to be higher? Not really. Jonas Brodin, the argument's there for him being a top 20 left defenseman. He is one of the best defensemen in the NHL and has been for quite a while now, so not upset about that. Seeing Morgan Riley there, also not the most egregious thing in the world. 87 defensive awareness, probably a little bit too high, but that is what it is. And then Mackenzie Weegar is somebody else that should still be in that category with the Vince Dunns, the Shea Theodores, and the Mikhail Sergachevs of the world for top 10 consideration. Seeing him at 20, but at the same time, you see a lot of these guys, all 87 overall, so it is what it is. For the most part, that left defensive side is okay. There are some pretty overrated players at this stage. Sorry to Adam Pelech. And again, I think the biggest victim of the rankings has to be Zach Werenski not being in the top 10. I cannot understand the logic or lack thereof at the, in terms of these ratings at this stage. We move to the right side, though. Let's talk about this. The top right defenseman is Cale Makar, the cover boy. And yeah, who the hell is going to disagree with this? Cale Makar, is right up there for the best right defenseman in the world. For my money, he is. Only silver wheels? Makes me wonder if maybe there was a mistake with what they uploaded again. Cale Makar not having a gold X Factor to me is absolutely insane. He's the best right defenseman in the world. For my money, he is the best defenseman in the world, period. Doesn't have a gold. Makes me think that's an error, really. But he is where he should be. Charlie McAvoy. I love me some Charlie McAvoy. I was looking for the old McAvoy. Where is my McAvoy? I love me some Charlie McAvoy. Charlie McAvoy is not the second best right defenseman in the world right now. I love him to death. Is he top 4? Yeah, I mean he's in a conversation for top 5. There are a couple of other guys kind of right on that line as well, where you could say, okay, McAvoy kind of gets bumped down a little bit. He is in the top 10, obviously, no doubt about it. Again, also no gold, which is kind of crazy to me. I think Adam Fox should be outright ahead of Charlie McAvoy. He's more close to being neck and neck with Cale Makar. Again, I still have Makar over Adam Fox. Adam Fox is absolutely outstanding, and for me, it's a 2-horse race between him and Makar as the top right defenseman and the top defenseman outright in the NHL. Again, love me some Charlie McAvoy. The Bruins fan of me would love to say, oh yeah, McAvoy is as good as Adam Fox. No. Just for my money, not yet, at the very least. Erik Karlsson at 4. I would have him rounding out the top 3 with Makar and Fox, especially off of the last season. Obviously, he was absolutely insane. Again, him being at 4, though, okay, there can be an argument for it. No gold. It honestly makes me think that they're actively avoiding giving golds to defensemen because maybe they break franchise mode a little bit if they have golds. Maybe that's the case. Who's to say? Dougie Hamilton at 5. Gotta be honest, it's probably a little bit too high. He does have gold 1T. I would have Hamilton kind of in that tier of 8, 9, 10, maybe even the first man out of the conversation. 90 defensive awareness is pretty funny at this stage. Dougie Hamilton is the top 5. I think there are other guys that we are about to talk about that could be worthy of getting that ratings bump up. But again, you notice 90 overall and then 89s. The ratings are pretty close. John Carlson, absolutely in that conversation for a top 4 spot, maybe even again as far down as kind of the 6, 7 spot. So I don't think he's in a terrible position. Again, you could talk about defensive awareness. It is what it is. They do it to get the ratings up there. But top 10 defenseman, absolutely. Alex Pietrangelo, absolutely in that conversation for top 10. I think he's in the Dougie Hamilton category of the last few spots of the top 10, if not on the the first man outside of things. But obviously winning a second Stanley Cup in his career with the Vegas Golden Knights this year, I'm not surprised to see him top 10. Drew Doughty. This is a man who caused a lot of controversy in the past by still being extremely highly rated. He's not as highly rated as he once was. Is he a top 10 right defenseman? Absolutely. I think he's in that McAvoy Carlson category as someone who you could still make an argument for top 4, top 5, at the very least in like the 6, 7, 8 spot as well. So he is at 8. He's a top 10 defenseman right now on that right-hand side. So it's good to see him there. This yeah, it's an overrating. I love Moritz Seider. I think he can be that franchise number 1 defenseman for the Detroit Red Wings. He is not this right now. He is not Drew Doughty right now. He is not at 1 point off of Alex Pietrangelo. This is a rough one. It's a rough one to have him at an 88 right now. Give him the high potential for franchise mode purposes. That's an overrating at this stage for Moritz Seider. He's getting there, but he's not there yet. He's just not. I'm sorry. No, I'm not, actually, because it's the truth. And Chris Letang rounds out the top 10. Gotta be honest here. I'd have him outside the top 10. Top 20, yes, but outside the top 10. I think it's, and we'll see what the ratings are on the second page because I haven't looked. The most egregious miss to me for the top 10 has to be Aaron Ekblad. And who knows, he might be an 88 at 11th or 12th. But Aaron Ekblad should be a top 10. Brent Burns should still be a top 10. And I can't believe I'm saying this either. Similar story with Drew Doughty, someone who's bounced back. Seth Jones has an argument to be in the top 10 or in that first on the outs slot. He really stepped it up in Chicago. I can't believe I'm saying it because I was right there at the head of the bandwagon of Jesus Christ, he's cooked. Not quite. But we do get to the back half. Okay. Well, we see Ekblad and Jones, which is good. They're up there. And Ekblad does have the same rating. Seth Jones, good with it too. Brandon Montour had a very good season last year for the Florida Panthers, especially in the first round against my Boston Bruins, where he kicked the ever-loving hell out of them. That's a bit of an overrating, though, at this stage. Compared to the consistency that Ekblad has shown, for Montour to be the same rating as Ekblad, to me, is a little bit egregious. If you want to consider Montour in that top 20, absolutely. But in that first man out slot at number 11, it's a bit much. Ekblad and Jones, right where they should be at this stage. I can't disagree with it. Again, you can argue top 10 for both of them. Ryan Pulock is in that same category as Adam Pelech, where it's a little bit of an overrating at this stage based off of recent play. Again, Islanders are known as a defensive team, and from a defensive standpoint, they weren't amazing last season, especially. So that's a bit of a rough one. Jared Spurgeon being in that conversation, can't necessarily disagree with it. He has been very, very solid, obviously, for the past couple of years. Noah Dobson, again, might be a little bit of an overrating at this stage. It makes me think that they looked at the Islanders, said, good defensive team, let's make the best defenseman of the Islanders that much better. Makes me think that you better have Ilya Sorokin as the rightful number one goaltender in the NHL, like he is, because he is the one that earned Dobson, Pelech, and Pulock these ratings. Brent Burns, like I said, should be in that top 10 conversation. So he should be in the top 10. I'm sorry. Like that's a low rating for Brent Burns. Rasmus Andersson, no issue with that. Philip Hronek, no issue with that. Really, he's in that top 20 conversation, and as is Brett Pesce. So again, for the most part, similar to the wingers, there are players that you look at and say, okay, your rating might be a little bit too high, but you're in the general conversation. That's all well and good. But in a lot of ways, there are some players where I would love to know their logic for having them as highly rated as they do. In the defensive side, there's a few more examples of that compared to what we had for the forwards. So it makes me a little bit anxious for center and goaltending, which I imagine we'll get as soon as tomorrow. It's certainly by the end of the week, so I'll be here to kind of talk about that and give my thoughts. I do agree that so far, in a general sense, it looks better. I do still think there's just a long way to go. I talked more about that on the episode yesterday, the video yesterday. Is it an episode? Is this a series at this point? I suppose it is. But yeah, with that, we'll wind things down and we will return as soon as we can with more ratings discussion heading into NHL 24. It's a thumbs in the middle for me right now. We'll see what they do with centers and goalies. Goalies I'm scared for because that has been notoriously the position that sees the most legacy ratings of, well, this guy was good once, so he's still good now, which often isn't true. There's a certain jersey I'm looking at over there. Can you guess which one it is?